So, solid-state batteries, they really have captured our imagination, and I think it's on the back of computing. I mean, computing's all solid-state. It's a bunch of things that doesn't move and yet still does something, and there's something magical about that. And I think solid-state batteries have latched on, or been latched on, to that concept of solid-state. But there's no real difference between a solid-state battery and what we think of as a normal battery. So a normal battery consists of 5 things: current collectors, anode, cathode, separator and electrolyte. And a solid-state battery consists of the same things with one tiny difference. The electrolyte is a solid instead of being a liquid. Now, functionally they're the same, they perform in the same way, they act in the same way, they're made of the same components. It's just the electrolyte is solid. That's the only difference. Now, it does bring advantages. They have higher energy density, they charge much more rapidly, they're certainly more safer, so they're less likely to burst into flames in your pocket. So they do have a whole host of advantages that make them attractive, but the mystique of what they are comes down to the fact that the electrolyte is quite simply solid. Now you might wonder, well, why don't we already have them? And the answer is we do. In fact, the history of them is much greater than you might think. It was in 1831 to 1834 that Faraday played around with solid-state electrolytes. He actually was considered the father of solid-state ionics, which led to things like solid-state fuel cells, solid oxide fuel cells. And he investigated silver sulfide and lead fluoride as solid electrolytes. When they're heated up, they become very conductive. And so it was way back then when this idea was explored. And it's the same time as we're exploring things like the voltaic pile. In fact, Faraday was working on those about 20 years before the voltaic pile came out, which was the very first battery. So it's almost as old as batteries in themselves. And we've had them in commercial products since the 1970s. If you put a layer of silver on top of a layer of iodine, you get a silver iodide. That's a solid-state electrolyte, and there's a reaction that carries on through there, giving you a trickle charge for years. It's why silver iodide batteries are used in pacemakers and have been done from the 70s, because they're super safe, never going to blow up, last for absolutely ages. The only one teeny problem at that stage is they don't give out much current. So we've had solid-state batteries for a very long time, and we've had commercial products for a very long time. So the question then is, well, if that's the case, why haven't we got them in cars? Well, there's a very good reason we haven't got them in cars, and it's not to do with the existence of solid-state batteries per se, or even the performance of those solid-state batteries. It's the research on solid-state batteries has been super intensive for many years, and there are some marvellous things coming out, like the Murata battery, for instance, that came out in 2021 and is, I think, going to be delivered later on in 22-23, something like that. But there are batteries already out there that are being made, are solid state, and are entering the market. So why haven't we got them? It's because the question we're asking isn't the right question. Or it's not the question we need to ask, or the question we think we're asking. When we're asking why haven't we got solid-state batteries, we don't mean that. We mean, why haven't we got solid-state batteries that I can afford? The reason these things are small is they're really tricky to make. They have manufacturing problems associated with them that mean that the large-scale production of them is super expensive. It was estimated that if you wanted to run an electric vehicle from solid-state batteries at current state of manufacture, your battery would cost you $100,000. We're not asking for a solid-state battery per se, we're asking for a solid-state battery that is affordable. And that idea of affordability is the problem. It's where the real research is going on. The real research isn't going on into solid-state batteries. Everybody knows that solid-state batteries work. Everybody knows there's a whole classes of materials that will act as a solid-based electrolyte. The issue is how to get those solid-based electrolytes to be cheap enough that we can afford to buy them, and that will last long enough to actually give a decent job. Because in 2021, report came out from Cambridge highlighting some of the issues with solid-state batteries, predominantly to do things with things like the interface, void formation, dendrite propagation through the ceramic, that sort of thing. But it did highlight all of the technical issues that needed to be overcome before cheap and reliable, and bear in mind the emphasis here is on cheap, batteries could be produced. Now this is why they're always saying things like the first batteries will be released in 2030. Well, that's not true, of course. The first batteries were released in 1970. So what they actually mean is the first batteries that we might be able to afford will be in 2030. And it's like that old adage has it. When you say, when will nuclear fusion be? It's going to be in 30 years, and it is always going to be in 30 years from now. It moves the goalpost, and it seems the same thing is happening with solid-state batteries. That the goalpost of when they're going to be available moves on and on and on. And remember, by available, I mean affordable. That's the big issue here. Because largely the drivers in this are economic, because there's a lot of money to be made. But with the disadvantages and the problems associated with solid state, of course, we've come up with a whole other class of batteries called pseudo-solid state. Pseudo-solid state are essentially where they gel the electrolyte. So it's more like a jelly than it is a solid. And it's an attempt to overcome the limitations of solid state, including the cost of solid state, by simply making it a gel. And they add gelling agents to it. Now, one that was added to lead-acid batteries about 100 years ago was fumed silica. If you put fumed silica into your lead-acid battery, it will make the sulfuric acid, the electrolyte, a jelly. And that's what an awful lot of sealed batteries were to start with. Of course, dry cells developed when they put plaster of Paris in the cell. These kind of qualify as pseudo-solid state, and they've been around for a very long time as well, but they're also getting an awful lot of attention, given new materials, to create a whole class of batteries in between liquid and solid, being the pseudo-solid batteries. The way to make a solid-state battery currently is using things like atomic layer deposition and sputtering and chemical bath deposition, and they're only amenable to small scale, tiny little devices. And of course Murata, the latest greatest battery that's coming out, the Japanese one, that is being released as a tiny battery, and there are very good reasons for that. So solid-state batteries have been here for years, since the 70s, about the same time as lithium batteries. They started their early development at the same time as ordinary batteries. The reason we don't have large ones is just to do with the technical challenges, or rather, it's more to do with the technical challenges of large-scale manufacture than it is to do with the challenges of the batteries themselves, because the desire for a solid-state battery is not the desire for a solid-state battery. It's the desire for a solid-state battery that we can afford. That really is the state of solid state. It's there, it's developed, there are products on the market, but they're still very hard to make and makes them very expensive. And if anybody can make it much cheaper, then sure, they're going to dominate the market. But there's an awful lot of people out there who are peddling snake oil, which is fairly common in that kind of marketplace. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope it was of interest, and thank you very much for watching.